Utter moral cowardice to ask one group of people, females, to have unity with those actively seeking to erase us as a class of people.
Hello witches, and welcome back to Activist Witch, where we discuss witchcraft and activism. You can call me Isha, my pronouns are she, they, and in this video we're going to answer more in detail and expanding on the question that was asked in the last video: why are so many witches TERFs? So we're going to look into the second wave feminism of activism and witchcraft of the 60s and 70s, how it evolved in trans-exclusionary radical feminists, and how that area of feminism is actually been taken over in the last 30 years by the alt-right, the actual fascists and Nazis. Proven. So let's get into it. But before we get started, let me remind you that I've opened a Ko-fi, which is an alternative to Patreon that takes less from creators and it's not fascist. And on there you can do a one-off donation, a monthly donation, or even get a tarot reading with me, Italian style. The low-income option starts at £5. And for the foreseeable future, any income that I get from tarot readings will go directly to support Coaches to Gaza, who are part of the mutual aid groups that support Palestinian people evacuated to Egypt. So if you decide to support me there, thank you so very much. Also, because thanks to the last video we have reached 5,000 subscribers, I'm planning on doing a Q&A, so you can leave me any question and I will answer it in a specific video that I will do to celebrate 5,000 subscribers. Thank you, welcome. Down in the description below you find two links, one to a post where you can just leave your question as a comment and I will say hi to you, or if you prefer to leave it anonymously, there's a Google form for that. Now this video exists because last week's video took a bit of a life of its own, didn't it? Thank you so much if you came here through that video. In that video, what I tried to do was to explore the ways in which the new right actively recruits in pagan circles. And the example that I used for that was how Scarlet Imprint decided to go transphobic, misogynistic and racist against Imane Khelif, the cis woman boxer playing that actually won gold at Paris 2024. But since that video was published, I kept thinking that question that actually is in the title has much bigger answer, and I wish I had gone into that. I hadn't planned on the title for that video, I just put it there when I uploaded it. And someone on Reddit made me notice, oh, you know, this title is a bit clickbaity, so of course I latched upon that. Although the issue there was that by saying that, they were denying that the issue was systemic. They were just saying, oh, you're reading a couple of posts, it's a couple of bad apples. It doesn't mean that the issue is systemic. It doesn't mean that these people are bad because they're pagans. But as we highlighted in the other video, no, there are a lot of overlaps. And today we're gonna go more into the overlaps between white feminism, activism, unfortunately, that turns to trans-exclusionary radical feminism and by now has gone down the alt-right pipeline. Now, you know I love me a good quote to start off because examples really allow us to put all these principles into something precipitated into reality. And accidentally, this week, while I was researching more for this video, I realized that TERFs actively took things away from us, from the witchcraft community already. Personally, they took something away from me because I didn't know before. One of the witches and activists that I most look up to, Starhawk, has been beaten into submission and silence by TERFs. What do I mean by that? Well, in 2018, she published an essay named A Unified Movement for Gender Justice. And despite the fact that as a cis, white, Jewish woman, she was encouraging both TERFs and trans activists to work together in solidarity, the points that she made in this essay were half reasonable.
The right to self-determination, the right to define for ourselves who we are and how we present ourselves in the world.
The right of bodily sovereignty. Our human right to determine what happens to our bodies, to have our boundaries respected and our bodily integrity inviolate, and to make our own choices. This right encompasses the right of a pregnant woman to choose whether or not to bear a child, the right of non-binary folks to redefine what gender means to them and to choose how they live in the world, the right of those who need it to have access to birth control, or hormones, or surgery, the right to research that might inform decisions about medical interventions of all sorts, and the right to make those decisions for oneself, the right of all genders to be free from rape or harassment, and more. All of these are linked, and we need to stand in solidarity with one another to defend them.
The right to be our own moral authority. Politics, media, and social media pressure us to stake out clear, simple positions and defend them vehemently. But many decisions are complex. Whether or not to have an abortion, whether or what type of medical intervention to seek. So many of the choices we make around issues of sex, gender, biology, and identity are actually very deeply personal and intimate, and don't always fall into easy sound bites. We have the basic human right to struggle with that complexity ourselves, to choose our own advisors, define our own guiding principles, and be the arbiters of our own conscience.
The reasons that she was giving was, we should ally and always remember to respect these 3 points. The right to self-determination, the right to bodily sovereignty, and the right to be our own moral authority. Authority, Amelia.
Authority.
The irony is that, of course, all these points actually was basically telling TERFs, you don't get to decide, you don't get to tell anyone what you think they are. You believe what they tell you and you respect that. And TERFs do not understand anything about respect. So what happened after this essay was that TERFs in the comments ate Starhawk up alive.
Starhawk, all people on Earth deserve equal rights. All people, with extremely few exceptions, are male or female. We are born being one or the other, and there are very few people who present with both sets of external and internal genital structures, and they are not transgender. Gender is something we have created to put people in rigid boxes. A man is not a woman because he feels it. You know in your heart, I am sure that this is not true. You have had a wonderful influence on women in your lifetime. Please don't ruin that by buying into a set of men's feelings. Only natural-born women truly are women. Please continue the respect you had for us in the past. This is very hurtful.
Well said, and thank you. I am experiencing disappointment and disbelief that Starhawk is supporting this most misogynistic of ideologies.
Utter moral cowardice to ask one group of people, females, to have unity with those actively seeking to erase us as a class of people. Maybe Starhawk doesn't think she'll ever do serious incarceration time and be subjected to a male rapist in prison, or forced to seek refuge in a women's shelter only to be told that she must share a room with a male who claims to be female, so she can't actually have much empathy for those situations. She certainly will never be a female who loses a women's sporting event to a male, or be a 13-year-old lesbian coerced by her peers to declare that she's actually a boy and make preparations for breast removal surgery. But who cares? It's only females who suffer. This is uber-privileged pseudo-magnanimity from a known egotist, eager to throw women, especially poor women, under the bus.
Very disappointing. Men cannot be women. That is the truth. That dares to tell the truth. Truth or dare, Starhawk. Meriwether, former priestess of Witch Hazel Coven in Ashland, Oregon.
Now, Starhawks come from second-wave feminism, around the 60s and 70s, the hippie movement. And the audience that she still has, the entire reason why she has a job, basically, is because of this audience. So much as she's an activist, I kind of understand on a merely economical point of view why she had to step back when so many of her audience started to shout reverse oppression, basically. Pay attention to this, because this is something that the right does all the time. It's part of the alt-right playbook, which I'll link down in the description below. So any attack that they do on someone else, they claim it's because it's first been done on them. So in the comments you read stuff about how can you ask us to reason and sit down with people that want to take away our very own right to be called women. They also claim that they are at the receiving end of violence from trans activists because of slogans such as Pancha Nazi or Pancha TERF. Also, they talk about the violence that is getting deplatformed. So if you're invited to a conference, your invitation is revoked the moment that you say that, no, I don't think trans women are women. That is violence to them, and they claim that all of these things have been done to them and they never did anything. So within 2 weeks, Starhawk basically publishes an updated essay that actually is basically a retraction of what she said before, saying,
"End the verbal violence and name-calling. It's time to put away the I punch TERF signs, the imagery of violence against women, even when couched as performance art, as in the recent exhibit shown at the San Francisco Library. We need trans folks and their allies to speak out against such things, just as we need to retire the men in skirts meme and the imagery that dehumanizes trans folks. TERF, trans excluding radical feminist, might have started as a descriptive term, but it has become something else altogether. As for calling people Nazis, hey, there are real bona fide Aryan-loving Nazis out there, despite how 1930s that might seem. So let's reserve that word for them. Terms that dehumanize people encourage and justify violence against women and all gender non-conforming folks and reinforce patriarchy."
And in that essay, all she does is basically telling trans activists to take it and apologize. And in this, what surprised me the most was that Starhawk seems to have an understanding of intersectionality, even if it came after second wave feminism. Second wave feminism, again, 60s and 70s. Intersectionality is a concept that started in the 1980s thanks to Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a black woman.
Intersectionality is a lens, a prism for seeing the way in which various forms of inequality often operate together and exacerbate each other. We tend to talk about race inequality as separate from inequality based on gender, class, sexuality, or immigrant status. What's often missing is how some people are subject to all of these, and the experience is not just the sum of its parts.
And intersectionality looks at every kind of issue, every kind of marginalization, as an imbalance of power. Within the system, there's a hierarchy of power, at the top of which there's the patriarchy, so white, cis, het, able men. And every other marginalization is in some way oppressed by a system that prioritizes cis, white, het, able men, not only through open attacks, but through the pervasive biases that are distributed through culture and society. That's also an interesting point. You will see that a lot of transphobes will claim that they are not transphobes. J.K. Rowling still claims to this day that she is not being transphobic. Their perception is, if I am not pinning you to a wall with a knife to your throat, I am not being violent to you, so I am not being transphobic, I am not being racist. As you can guess, when you consider the hierarchy of power from patriarchy downwards, cis, white, het, bi, or lesbian women are still very much high on the ladder. Trans people, especially if they then are trans people of color, if they are disabled trans people, if there are other marginalization added on to that, clearly are much, much lower in this ladder of power. So the fact that Starhawk calls basically for the oppressed to reason with the oppressor who holds more power, whether they want to admit their transphobia or not, they hold more power. It's not exactly in her style. And I know this for a fact because being a Jewish woman, she still supports Palestine. What makes me question her support in general then for Palestine and for the oppressed is the idea that does she then do that only if they are taking and accepting their victimhood? In the sense that it makes me wonder, does she offer this kind of support and solidarity only if it's pity and not respect? And there's a bit of white saviorism in that, if that's the case.
The term white savior is a critical description of a white person who is depicted as liberating, rescuing, or uplifting non-white people. It is critical in the sense that it describes a pattern in which people of color in economically underdeveloped nations that are majority non-white are denied agency and are seen as passive recipients of white benevolence.
In short, you do not ask the victim to stop defending themselves, no matter how loud TERFs can say, no, we are the victim. Because at the end of the day, you need to look at data and facts. And TERFs on their side claim that they're being deplatformed. They fear that something bad would happen to them if they shared a space with someone they deem a man, and because of that, they claim trans people are taking women-only spaces from women. But those are the things that they latch upon, and they claim victimhood because of those reasons. Well, to the opposing side, I will just say this. They claim oppression, they claim threats of violence through the Pancha TERF slogans, but on a practical matter, TERFs still don't need a TERFs Day of Remembrance. But on the contrary, every loss that there is in the trans community can be traced back to policies or to culture that is actively affected by people like J.K. Rowling speaking to millions of people calling trans people degenerates or non-existing or not worth of existence, and recognition and therefore respect. Or the fact that she directly donated huge amounts of money to lobbying groups to literally affect the laws and the government of this country. We had elections in July 2024, and as soon as Labour was elected, J.K. Rowling is a donor of Labour. She's a quintessential liberal, by the way, she's not a lefty. And she demanded a meeting with the government, with the new Labour government, to get reassurances about the gender issues, which in very simple terms means I am giving you money. You need to show me that you will not give these transes any rights because I say so, because I give you money. We are at the point where a billionaire who has decided to destroy her career in favor of her aid for trans people, for trans women specifically, can directly affect the legislation of a country like the UK. And TERFs claim that a banner saying Pancha TERF is violence without ever acknowledging that the way that they have actively changed the culture of the UK in the last 5 or 6 years, to the point that the UK is now called TERF Island, and it has resulted in incredible losses for the trans community. Again, we have a Trans Day of Remembrance. That the oppressor, the people that are causing these losses, claim that the trans community are the ones violent enough to demand of Starhawk a retraction when she asked simply respect bodily autonomy, respect the right of self-determination, respect the fact that everybody has a right to their own morality about themselves. No, we do not recognize them as women. You do not get to tell us to share space with them. That is what TERFs took away from us witches. Starhawk, who has a lot of weight in the community, was pretty much a trans supporter until that happened and she had to do a U-turn. Also, when you're Starhawk, you're this lovely old lady that has seen so much but has no skin in the game. Maybe doesn't know directly trans people, maybe doesn't know the issues that are at play, and just hears so many women from her audience telling her, no, we are the victims here. We are the ones that are threatened with punches. We are the ones that are being deplatformed. And as Starhawk, you don't know any better. You don't verify these things and you just take at face value what your audience tells you. Of course, TERFs are making this sound as they are the victims. And if you are not involved, you don't know any better, and you give the benefit of the doubt and suddenly start to believe that these women in such positions of power, with such influential power, are the victims here. That's not the case, but that's what they say. And if you don't look into it, you'll believe it. And by the way, I'm not saying that Starhawk didn't have the mind to decide for herself, but I completely understand on a practical level, a woman of her age, this is her business, this is how she pays her bills. She has to think about that, and she decided, this is my audience, it's easier for me to give in and to keep myself safe than to actually stand up for trans people. So this is what happened. Why are so many TERFs part of the community at all, though? What was so familiar and interesting to them that since actually the 60s and 70s and the 80s, when first TERFs started to be around, why were they so attracted and thinking that going into a certain kind of the witchcraft community, Wicca, reclamation, would have been good for them? My worry is that it comes from the Maiden Mother Crone archetype, which, much like we saw for the New Right in pagan circles with stuff like ecology, it can be weaponized and become a bioessentialist talking point.
Bioessentialism is the belief that people's most important characteristics are controlled by biology and cannot change, particularly the belief that some groups of people are naturally less good than others because of this. It can also be considered the belief that gender is controlled by a person's body being male or female and cannot change.
So I made a specific video about the Maiden Mother Crone, but in short, it's not such an old archetype as we are led to believe. We are led to believe that because there were triple goddesses in antiquity, that meant that they were representing the three phases of life of a woman according to the usefulness that she has to patriarchy. We'll go more into detail into that in a second. In reality, these triple goddesses of antiquity were tendentially three-faced, but with the same age. Hecate is one of the main examples that are brought. Hecate doesn't have Maiden, Mother, and Crone aspects. She's just a three-faced goddess. And in the statues that there are around of her from the olden days, the faces are the same woman, the same age, it's just three of them. The idea of the Maiden Mother Crone comes from the 40s and 50s, from the book by Robert Graves, The White Goddess. Robert Graves was a poet, a writer, and in the patriarchal way of seeing things, he used benevolent sexism in the figure of a woman and the divine feminine that exists for him to be inspired by her.
While hostile sexism is overt, aggressive, and easy to spot, benevolent sexism is covert and confusing. Men with benevolently sexist attitudes tend to hold stereotypical views of gender and see men as natural providers and protectors of women. While benevolent sexism may have a veneer of kindness and positivity toward women, it is a tactic, whether conscious or unconscious, of shaping women's behavior, rewarding them for playing by the rules and putting a glass ceiling over their heads. It is, as some researchers have called it, a powerful weapon of social control.
This figure exists so that he can talk about it, he can write about it, and he can be valued as a writer because of what he says about her. And the split in Maiden Mother Crone is very obviously about the way in which women are seen as useful by society. So the maiden is this young and fresh woman that is to be coveted and then married so that she becomes the mother to propagate the species, and that's when she gets the most respect from the community because she has done something of value for the species. When she stops being able to have children, she turns into a crone. And at most we consider her wise, but a lot of folklore also make us feel like the crone is to be avoided, the crone is to be feared. And actually all of these, in some circles, especially the Wicca circle for what I hear, is literally split the Maiden, Mother and Crone eras, depending on the phase of your menstrual cycle. Meaning that you become a maiden the moment that you first have your period, you become a mother the moment that you have children, and you become a crone the moment that you hit menopause and you don't have a period anymore. Think the feminists have tried for so long to separate women from their only value that patriarchy gave them, which is about having children, and then TERFs are bringing us back to that. It's quite the irony, isn't it? It's also quite the irony of the fact that in the acronym TERFs, they consider themselves feminist, which is one of the reasons why I will concede, if they want to be called gender critical, let them, because feminist, it's completely a misnomer for them. What they have done is actually take back a lot of things obtained by feminism to go along with the vision of the woman that the patriarchy has. And in the patriarchy, the maiden is to be used. The crone is to be feared and shunned. The only value comes with the mother, because with the mother, you are propagating the species. And you can tell that this is something that really upsets gender critical and TERFs, because one of the main attacks that they have then for trans men is the fact that they are no longer consumable by men and therefore by the species, because they will not procreate. What's the insane book Without the Uterus? Put that here. When you put the entire power and recognition of a woman and the way that she embodies the divine feminine down to her uterus, whether she bleeds or she stops bleeding or she starts to grow life in her uterus and all of that kind of stuff, you can see how this fits white women and white feminism. Because if their value is intrinsic, is in an organ that they are born with, there is nothing that they need to work for to have value, to be valued, which is something that if you are a queer person or a person of color, you might find very alien. No, we have to work for literally everything. We have to work twice as hard as white people to be recognized half as good. But the problem is that culturally, within patriarchy, white women, to be kept quiet, are promised this: you will have intrinsic value. You have value because you've been born a white woman. And because of that, you are second in the ladder just after cis white het able men. And the reason we want you and want to keep you quiet is that without you, we cannot continue the species. You need to procreate and have children for us to be able to, continue our name, continue our blood, which men are fixated about. And that's actually how we moved from matriarchy to patriarchy, because they wanted to be sure that their line would continue. In matriarchy, there would be stuff like the bacchanalias, and the virgins would get pregnant by the god when, during a party, they would just sleep with men. That was unacceptable for men. They needed to know that their seed, their line, their name would continue. And that's why they want monogamy, but actually not for themselves, just for the woman. That's this entire stuff. Do you understand? It makes sense? So if the value is promised as intrinsic, guess what? It's a privilege. It's something you were born with and you never had to work for, and it gives you an advantage. And this kept white women good and calm for a very long while, because basically it was telling them, you don't need to fight the patriarchy. You are second in line in patriarchy. That means that you have so many people behind you to basically feel better than. So you become our maiden to use, mother to procreate, and then kind of crone to be shunned, but we'll still sort of give you respect because, you've lived this far. You'll help raise other children anyway as a grandmother. You give us that. You give us your literally reproductive value, and we will keep you second in line, which, come on, in a long ladder, you still have a lot of people to oppress like we oppress you. And this worked until the early 1900s, until feminism started, so it worked for a very long time. But then again, you know what else wants to work within the system of patriarchy? White feminism as well.
White feminism is an ideology whose strategies for achieving gender equality are personalised autonomy, individual wealth, perpetual self-optimization, and supremacy. It's a specific way of viewing gender equality that is anchored in the accumulation of individual power rather than the redistribution of it. It can be practiced by anyone, of any race, background, allegiance, identity, or affiliation. It's a type of feminism that takes up the politics of power without questioning them. By replicating patterns of white supremacy, capitalist greed, corporate ascension, inhumane labour practices, and exploitation, and deeming it empowering for women to practice these tenets as men always have. The mindset is seductive as it positions the singular you as the agent of change, making your individual needs the touchpoint for all revolutionary disruption.
So, first wave feminism, the suffragists, and second wave feminism, we're still okay thinking, I don't need to break the ladder, I don't need to break the wheel, I don't need to break the system. I need to work within this system to be elevated at the same level of the top. You can understand that when we're talking about white, cis, het, able, pretty women that just come second in the ladder after cis, white, het, able men, their idea of feminism becomes, I'm just one step away from the top. I want what men have. I want the same pay as them. I want to be in boardrooms. I want to be a girl boss. That was the ambition of most of second wave feminism. Let white women do what white men do within patriarchy. Because they are just one step down, one marginalization away. So what they want is to be elevated that one step so that everything men have and do, they can do as well. Within still the hierarchical system that is white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. And in that sense, they do not understand equity as opposed to equality, because they don't conceive any issue that comes from any other marginalization beyond just being a woman instead of a white man to be part of the issues of feminism.
Equality and equity are two strategies that are often used in an attempt to produce fairness, but the desired outcomes for the two are very different. Equality suggests that everyone is at a particular starting point and should be treated the same. It seeks to promote fairness, but it can only work if everyone starts from the same place and needs the same level of support. Equity, by way of contrast, aims to give everyone what they need to be successful. It focuses on equality of outcomes. This involves taking into account structures which might put particular groups at a disadvantage. Equality aims to promote fairness, but it can only work if everyone starts from the same place and needs the same aid. Equity, on the face of it, appears unfair, but it actively moves everyone closer to success by leveling the playing field. It is important to recognize that not everyone starts at the same place, and not everyone has the same needs. For example, a classroom made up of students with different learning styles.
The point of equity instead of equality is to understand that for everybody to be on the same level, they require different adjustment. They require different kind of help. Because white women just need the recognition of, oh, as women, we can do what men do. We deserve what men deserve. They do not understand that there are other people that are not white, cis, het, able, a certain kind of wealthy. And so all the issues that come from these other marginalizations, and therefore they don't understand that it has to do still with feminism because it doesn't have to do with them. Because admittedly, white, cis, het, able, pretty, kind of wealthy women are already very privileged. And they think that feminism is just about them. Hence, white feminism.
White bourgeois feminism, which is unfortunately the most represented feminism today, and most people think of that as feminism. But that ignores the fact that huge numbers of organic and academic intellectuals who are women of color have transformed the very nature of feminism. And the hallmark of feminism today is what we call intersectionality, a recognition of and not only the interrelating character of identities, but as I frequently say, I think intersectionality is most helpful when we think about the intersectionality of social justice struggles.
By the way, it doesn't take being white to be a white feminist. It's just the complete disregard for anyone that has any other kind of marginalization and then wants anything different than just climbing the ladder rather than breaking the ladder. We'll get to breaking the ladder in a second. And because it still wants to function within patriarchal capitalistic rules, white feminism is very wrongly focused on the individual. One woman gets something, it's a win for all women, which, believe you me, a white woman getting into a boardroom does not make a difference for me. Or unfortunately, as we have seen here in the UK with 3 women prime ministers that were from the Conservative Party, absolutely. Them being in power does not give us power as femme or women. If anything, they have actively taken rights away from us and closed doors behind them because
supporters of white feminism want to reconcile their feminism with the mythology that they are still special, better, work harder, and are therefore entitled to the roles that any combination of race, class privilege, conventional femininity, and/or a cisgender have landed them. White feminism aspires to and affirms the illusion of whiteness and everything it promises, even if those who practice it are not.
For people with that mentality that are so close to the top already, once they get to the top, the idea is, I need to be unique, I need to be special, I made it here in their delusion for meritocracy, and so I need to make sure to close the doors behind me, because everybody else at this point, within the concept of patriarchy that I'm still working with, and I'm still working with the hierarchy of, everybody that is behind me is a potential competitor. I need to cut them off.
Queen Bee syndrome is a phenomenon first defined by Carol Tavris and two collaborators in 1973. Queen Bee is a derogatory term applied to women who have achieved success in traditionally male-dominated fields. These women often take on masculine traits and distance themselves from other women in the workplace in order to succeed. They may also view or treat subordinates more critically if they are female, and refuse to help other women rise up the ranks as a form of self-preservation.
That's why white feminism doesn't really help anyone on the long run. And this is also why it's actually a very easy and open pipeline to go from TERFs to right-wing ideals, because if your value is intrinsic, is in the womb, and you will get respected the moment that you get married to a man and you give him children. And so there's this concept, I don't know if you have seen it around, when women become mothers, a lot of them start to grow this entitlement that now I deserve respect from society just because I popped out a child. And that is exactly that kind of mentality. I am now entitled to respect because I have fulfilled what patriarchy asked of me. I've made a child. And I would actually argue and question that the idea that is so pervasive that the point of a woman, one becomes a woman the moment that they have a child, is literally what has been fed to us by the patriarchy, because it's the one thing that they need women for. And if you play within those rules, you think that becoming a mother will give you that respect that you never had before as a maiden. You will very hardly still keep when you're a crone. So this is your moment to shine. Why? Because your womb worked. And you can see where this mindset is very easily taken to its logical conclusion. If your value is just based on an organ, and that organ is supposed to mean womanhood, now that queer people can adopt children, now that trans women are recognized as women, suddenly your value, because it was a privilege, feels like it's taken away from you. No, I was the only one that was supposed to be respected in this way. Who are these transes, these queers that are taking what is rightfully mine, what I was promised since the moment that I was born as a white girl? This would have been my value. How come now I have to share it?
As the culture evolves, people who benefited from the old ways invariably see themselves as victims of change. The world used to fit them like a glove, but it no longer does. Increasingly, they find themselves in unfamiliar situations that feel unfair or even unsafe. Their concerns used to take centre stage, but now they must compete with the formerly invisible concerns of others.
To the privileged, equality feels like oppression. That's the mentality, by the way, of right-wing women. So let's look very briefly at the history of TERFs, trans-exclusionary radical feminists, because it has now become something that wasn't at the beginning. At the beginning, they were mostly laughed and ridiculed around the 80s because their existence was just there to basically keep trans women away from lesbian folk festivals. This is important because folk festival sounds very much like the kind of thing that us in the pagan and witchcraft community would be interested in, wouldn't it? And as we saw in the previous video, one of the talking points of the new right to recruit within pagan circles is about ecology that becomes ecofascism.
The original TERFs hailed from a specific strain of trans-hostile radical feminism. Their political battles were focused on things like condemning strap-ons as a symbol of male dominance or keeping trans women out of lesbian folk festivals. They were widely mocked, highly unpopular, and, even at their peak in the 1980s, exercised almost no political power. In the mid-2010s, a small group of activists with fascist sympathies, most of them hailing from the environmentalist group Deep Green Resistance, DGR, infiltrated the older movement and dragged it to the right. DGR members were eco-fascists. They argue for violent action that would cause a mass die-off of humanity in order to save the environment. They initially recruited from anarchist and environmental groups.
The fact that the infiltration of fascism came from an environmental group called Deep Green Resistance casually brings up again the fact that these points of connection where fascism can infiltrate groups like the pagan community, but also feminism we see here, use the same talking points in something good that it's right to care about, like the health of our planet, and it can be pushed to fascist ways of taking care of that, which include genocide, which include eugenics, which includes all those things that are under eco-fascism. And by the way, this kind of infiltration started in the 2010s, and up until the 2020s, it was very well said and recognized by alt-right circles. We are doing this to push this kind of feminism more towards the right, so that eventually they will help with all our bioessentialist talking points.
A 2020 article from Radix Journal, a far-right publication founded by the neo-Nazi Richard Spencer, lays out a strategy. In the article entitled The TERF to Distant Right Pipeline, author Kat S. notes that TERF's insistence on biological sex as an immutable binary, all men depraved and violent, all women fragile victims, may make it easier to convince them of other biological hierarchies. Their insistence on seeing trans women as violent men in particular can be weaponized against men of colour and turned into overt white supremacy. It doesn't take any thinking woman long to see exactly which men are committing violent crime and the majority of partner violence, and race realism is the natural next step. Ultimately, the article reasons it should be easy to convince TERFs that supporting the rights of biological women means rejecting the mid to late 20th century Jewish-led feminist theory, particularly the corporate slavery of work outside the home, in favour of accepting their biologically ordained roles as wives and mothers. A pro-family, pro-natalist movement requires some degree of female participation, Kat S. writes, and reframing the patriarchy paradigm is essential. Ultimately, TERFs must be led to see patriarchy as a system where men's urges and strengths are allowed to flourish and channeled into healthy outlets, and women are protected and respected for their material reality and the gifts our unique biology affords. It's a grim irony that, by insisting on a feminism without any trans women in it, TERFs have wound up constructing the tool by which fascists aim to destroy feminism altogether.
They literally go and admit we need to convince TERFs that working within patriarchy, so like white feminism used to want to do, is what they should aim for. Because within patriarchy, we can give them rules to which, if they stay down and recognize the value of men, we can keep them protected. The idea that a woman's way to get protected is to give in to patriarchy and be the housewife because her man, her husband, who gives her children, will therefore have to respect her and protect her from other men, is exactly the mentality of right-wing women and has been for decades. Unsurprisingly, when you start from gender-critical point of view, very usually you also start to espouse other takes that are indeed from the alt-rights and go full-on onto conspiracy theorists. It's not a news that J.K. Rowling is now a Holocaust denier, and there are a lot of gender criticals, one of the most prominent being Jennifer Bilek, who actually came from Deep Green Resistance, that has now turned towards the idea of the Jewish conspiracies, the transhumanist billionaires, ending up with the idea that vaccines give you chips that Google controls you with. I'm not joking, this is actually what she thinks.
Who's that Pokemon?
It's Pikachu!
It's Clefairy!
One of the most interesting things for me to observe in this, as a person of color, was realizing that one of the accusations to the trans ideology is that we are transing but just white children. So we are dangerous groomers that will convince white children to transition and therefore not to occupy their space within a recognized patriarchal family structure and have children of their own. But don't worry, this doesn't happen to black kids. They have this obsessive focus on fertility, which is not a new thing. In her book, Killing the Black Body, Dorothy Roberts literally just goes into this on how in the entire 20th century, one of the ways of patriarchy to work towards the propagation of their species, of the white species, and stopping anyone that they considered undesirable, was to treat with a double standard white women and women of color. And if you give two groups that could unify against you, against the patriarchy, different things to prioritize, you basically divide and conquer, you put them against each other. So the trouble for white women was to have birth control, was to be given hysterectomies if they had endometriosis. And on the other side, women of color were many times forcibly sterilized without their consent after they had given birth. This obsession about fertility, about the preferred race has to continue, has to endure, while the undesirable should not, is eugenics. And the idea that trans people are dangerous because if they are white, we are taking breeding stock away from the white race. You can see the issue here, can't you?
And if we need more direct proof that attacks against transgender rights are attacks against all of our rights, really, we need to look no further than the Bell versus Tavistock case. This was a case in which Kira Bell, someone who'd previously transitioned to male but later regretted it, sued the Tavistock gender identity service that serves basically all the teenagers in the UK who wish to transition for not challenging them harder enough on their desire to transition. In this case, they specifically went after something called Gillet competence. This is the legal mechanism via which those aged under 16 are able to give informed consent for medical procedures. Most commonly in the UK, this is used to allow girls under the age of 16 to access birth control pills without their parental consent, because we've determined that they have the competence to be able to make that decision for themselves. This is an issue of bodily autonomy for them. To weaken Gillet competency is to weaken reproductive rights and a woman's right to bodily autonomy, regardless of her age.
Judith Butler wrote an amazing article for The Guardian in 2021, I think, which explores all the reasons why, from alt-right's talking points, they have bled through trans-exclusionary radical feminists, and how, very ironically, these feminists, these gender criticals, they're not feminists. Let's not give them that privilege to be called that. Because they are actively supporting the patriarchal take on anything femme to quite literally serve themselves on a platter to be the kind of woman the patriarchy has always wanted. It's better to serve actual men than to support their trans siblings. And again, I can understand that only in the view of if you have been given privilege and all of a sudden there's an equalizer that brings people to your same level, you will trash, kick, and scream to not lose the privilege that you've been given because you don't know how to work on your own value. So you need something intrinsic like bleeding, like organs, to feel superior of other people. And you will do everything in your power to avoid others being raised to your level. It's a very short-sighted take. The difference between, in this case, right-wing women, TERFs, because believe me, whether they admit it or not, their beliefs are right-wing. The things that they stand up for are right-wing at this point, is that they are looking at a much shorter-term situation than their leftist counterpart. And if they were to team up, indeed, with their trans siblings, they would get liberation from patriarchy. It's hard to want liberation from a system that dangles the carrot in front of you, and again, being a white woman, you're just a step away from the top. Do you want to break a system that you're so close to be at the top of, or wouldn't you rather work with it, taking the delusion that they will tell you, we will give you all this privilege just because of who you are? One of the most interesting points that Judy Butler highlights is how the talking points of TERFs do come from the alt-right playbook and try to be divisive and confusing. It's the same kind of technique that Russia uses. One of the reasons Russia is so against LGBT rights is because the West, the civilized West, enormous air quotes, are trying to use them and pinkwash them as sort of an equalizer. Russia knows that how you destabilize culture and places is by dividing, because dividing gives you confusion. If you're both pro and anti something at the same time, there's just this short circuit that is the foundation of most cognitive dissonance.
Anti-gender movements are not just reactionary, but fascist trends, the kind that support increasingly authoritarian governments. The inconsistency of their arguments and their equal opportunity approach to rhetorical strategies of the left and right produce a confusing discourse for some, a compelling one for others. But they are typical of fascist movements that twist rationality to suit hyper-nationalist aims. The anti-gender movement is not a conservative position with a clear set of principles. No, as a fascist trend, it mobilises a range of rhetorical strategies from across the political spectrum to maximise the fear of infiltration and destruction that comes from a diverse set of economic and social forces. It does not strive for consistency, for its incoherence is part of its power. It is a reactionary incitement, an incendiary bundle of contradictory and incoherent claims and accusations. They feast off the very instability they promise to contain, and their own discourse only delivers more chaos. Through a spate of inconsistent and hyperbolic claims, they concoct a world of multiple imminent threats to make the case for authoritarian rule and censorship. In the imaginary of the anti-gender ideology advocates, gender is like an unwanted migrant, an incoming stain, but also, at the same time, a colonizer or totalitarian who must be thrown off. It mixes right and left discourses at will.
They're coming and they're infiltrating our culture, and they are these lowlives. But at the same time, they also come here as the colonizer with their ideas, transgendering our kids. So at the same time, they are these small, insignificant things that needs to be pushed back, but also this huge corporate elite of transhumanists that want to trans everyone. Which one is it? And most of their talking points bring those opposite takes, because the entire point is confusion. Because when you bring confusion and people don't quite understand or cannot quite follow, it becomes much easier to convince them that, yeah, you don't understand this, but it sounds bad. You know what you need to do? You need to give me, the government, the fascist government, power so that I can take care of this for you.
Stoked by fears of infrastructural collapse, anti-migrant anger, and, in Europe, the fear of losing the sanctity of the heteronormative family, national identity, and white supremacy, many insist the destructive forces of gender, post-colonial studies, and critical race theory are to blame. When gender is thus figured as a foreign invasion, these groups clearly reveal that they are in the business of nation building. The nation for which they are fighting is built upon white supremacy, the heteronormative family, and a resistance to all critical questioning of norms that have clearly restricted the freedoms and imperiled the lives of so many people. The vanishing of social services under neoliberalism has put pressure on the traditional family to provide care work, as many feminists have rightly argued. In turn, the fortification of patriarchal norms within the family and the state has become, for some, imperative in the face of decimated social services, unpayable debt, and lost income. It is against this background of anxiety and fear that gender is portrayed as a destructive force, a foreign influence infiltrating the body politic and destabilizing the traditional family.
That's how fascism rises, and that's exactly why the right has infiltrated TERFs for the last 15 years. And it's working spectacularly. Thank you, TERFs. You are doing the patriarchy's dirty job for them. And ironically, as one of the many things you do, you are doing this, and you are also claiming instead that the ones upholding male values are trans people, who are both, in the case of trans men, trans women, and also non-binary people, actually trying to break down the patriarchy system. You are literally upholding it by your saying that what you're doing, we are doing. And not only TERFs never argue in good faith, they argue in a way that comes from directly the alt-right playbook, which again is linked down in the description below. You will see it in the comments of my previous video. They start to adding up details that you would need time to verify. And when you hear a thing in such detail, you instinctively believe, well, if there is so much detail, it must be true. There isn't, but they pile it up and up and up. And because it takes time to verify it, and they always fight for the audience, not with the person, they genuinely hope that if they pile up enough fake details, the amount of details will make it sound true. It is all part of the way that they argue in bad faith. You are literally allowing and promoting fascist ideas of keeping women down because that way you've been promised that at least as women you will be second in line to men. We want to break the cycle, we want to break down the system because you are so privileged still within that system, you're okay serving the patriarchy as long as it means not sharing your power. You know how I always say, in the world, I think that there are just two kinds of people. The ones that something bad has happened to you, it needs to happen to everybody else because you survived and so it will make them stronger or it will prove that they are as worthy as you have been of survival. Or something bad happened to you and you will do everything in your power for no one to have to go through what you've gone through. And the same way in the witchcraft community, witches, for what I've seen, have two fundamental creation stories. Either you come to witchcraft as an outsider because you have been oppressed in a system that doesn't recognize the value of sharing, of community, of care, of love for the land, of connection with your ancestors, of solidarity, of all those things that don't necessarily have economical value within capitalism. And so you want to create this kind of community and solidarity. Or there are those witches that come to witchcraft with the idea of, aha, because I have a uterus, I already embody the goddess, so I am meant to lead. I am meant to be in a position of power here as well, because of something intrinsic that I never had to work a day on in my life, which is a uterus. And that's why there's this emphasis on bleeding, on the power of bleeding. Those are also the sides of the community that says a man cannot be a witch because they don't bleed. No, we are the goddess. And it's indeed bioessentialist because they don't understand what it is working for something, for any kind of merit. They have always been given privilege and they think that the only way to claim anything is through privilege because they were born a certain way. And to think that divinity can be limited by something as fickle and limited as biology is to completely fail to understand the concept of divinity as something bigger than us that contains us. A body is quite limited. If your vision of divinity has to do with organs, you might have to have a lot of things to reconsider. For this, actually, I will send you to Vonnie, which is a Wicca practitioner. She has been making videos for 15 years, and she has a beautiful video about, within my own community, I do not understand this bioessentialism, this getting stuck on the function of organs, because that's not even how I see the Maiden Mother Crone. So I'm not bashing anyone that still uses the archetype of the Maiden Mother Crone, but as Vonnie explains, the way to see it about bleeding and uteruses and having children is so faulty, and how can you limit divinity to something as faulty as human bodies? So Isha, we've been talking here for almost an hour. What are the solutions if the community is so overtaken by TERFs? How can we have a witchcraft community that is inclusive, that is based in solidarity, that is based in mutual support? And to me, the answer goes back to what is wrong with white feminism. There is no point in climbing a ladder of an oppressive system. The point is breaking the ladder. The point is breaking the system. Now, I know again that people that have privilege within that system might want to put things on a scale and decide, is it easier for me to climb this ladder, or am I low enough that I need to break it? And the entire point would be, unless you're a cis white het able man that is not an ally, everything else should want this hierarchy to be broken, because it serves no one else but the ones at the top. And the fact that being promised any kind of power makes you betray everybody that comes behind you in that ladder kinda says a lot about the person that you are. And without the kind of solidarity and care, I don't think you understand what witchcraft is. The answer is a feminism, a womanism that doesn't want to equalize the ladder, that wants to break it. The hierarchical system based on privilege doesn't work. It will always be bioessentialist, patriarchal, white supremacist, and capitalistic because it has no incentive to change. The people at the top have no incentive to change this. So the entire point, which I think witchcraft already pushes us towards, is you do not go and try to claim the power of the ones at the top for yourself. The entire point is to share the power. You know, much like the female gaze in cinema, it's not the male gaze applied to a male figure because you think that that's what women want to lust after. No, that's simply the male gaze applied to a man rather than a woman, according to this, again, very strict gender binary. No, the female gaze in cinema is breaking down the system based on the male gaze, presenting something completely different from the objectification of the male gaze, which usually therefore brings on something that is emotional instead of sexualized. I mean, look at Catholicism. I've done a specific video about that. Even a system like that, which is incredibly patriarchal, recognizes the existence of magic. It just tells you that the only ones entitled to use that magic that are high enough to be trusted with magic are priests, which happen to be men. In witchcraft, the entire point is cutting out the middleman. We are literally here to change and influence reality according to our will. Are you going to let TERFs tell you what kind of witch you're allowed to be? And until the next time, I really hope that you can agree we need to hex the cis-het-able patriarchy together, because there's a lot of need for it, and it worsens your life, whoever you are.